so without further ado, this is Joost Nol.
All right, thanks. I hope you'll find this entertaining. It's I'm really a storyteller, and I would love to get reactions if you have while I talk or afterwards. I'll try to keep a bit of time at the end. And what I do is sort of charge people a little bit. I'm kind of a disruptor. I like to challenge things that are done for a long time and probably had a good purpose, but maybe it's time to think about it and rethink about it. And so if you to refresh our minds, what we put on for this, it talks about, you know, the world of 21st century, that it's rapidly changing. Population movements move around a lot, and I'll talk about that a bit, much more and more frequently than ever before. The job market in Canada is going to drastically change. I just read a report, in the next decade we're going to lose 40,000 production jobs, and artificial intelligence is going to go in. And what's that going to mean for people like us that prepare, mostly younger but also mature learners and new immigrants? You know, understanding statistics and being able to do something with it, understanding what big data is, we all talk about it, but very few people really know what that means. In the financial world a few weeks ago, I just learned about blockchains and bitcoins and things that we have to get our head around. And I think that it has an impact on primary, secondary, and tertiary education, and I'll share some stories. And we see in the world that, for example, people in Finland throw out all the curriculum, right? They've been pretty drastic. Their primary and secondary education is what the students want. And there'll be a lot of educators here that say, well, students don't know what they want. We got to tell them what they want. The Finnish would disagree with you, and right? So they have a very different philosophy. On the other part of the world, in Asia mostly, they go incredibly on memorization. And I'll share some stories about myself on that. And the question will be who wins or who comes out as victors. And it's not so much to resolve that, certainly not tonight, but I will share some opinions. Most of it is personal opinions, so please don't hold Seneca responsible for it, right? I must say that I'm a bit intimidated to talk to people that make a living out of math, and why. I'm not sure if it's really a learning deficiency or a learning handicap or whatever the thing is, but I have a hard time memorizing, and I think I've always had, and so I think not everything in my brain works like for most other people, and I have a heck of a time memorizing. And I can't remember, if I have a new phone and new phone number, it takes me 3 years before I can tell you the number. When I was a little kid and my mother, I grew up in Holland, and so in the 60s, 70s, you would buy milk in a bottle and, you know, fresh cheese every day. And my mother thought this is good education, so she sent me off. And by the time I reached the stores, I forgot what she asked me to buy. And so I had to walk back, and I would ask my mother, can you make a note? She says, no, it's good you memorize it. So I would walk over and I say, okay, one bottle of such milk and one of it, and I would, the 10 minutes to the store, would have to repeat it all the time, otherwise I would forget it. I think that it was part of why I struggled with topics like math and science at high school. Maybe it was also because it was like a lot of teenagers and not willing to put the effort in, but really I think that the lack of memorizing capacity didn't help me. And the other thing was that we had a math teacher. In Holland you go 6 years primary, 6 years secondary, right? 6 and 6, different than here, 8 and 4. So the 6 years at high school, I had the same math teacher, and the smart kids in my class, 5 or 6 of them, they would correct our math teacher regularly. So I don't know, that didn't help me either, I think, but anyhow. And then we had, for example, an English teacher who was a British hippie, married a Dutch woman he probably met at a rock concert or something. Spoke perfect Dutch, but in class he would say, listen, no Dutch allowed. You meet me in a grocery store, you can speak Dutch to me, but here it's only English. And you know what, guys? I'm a hippie. I don't like grammar. I'm not going to do grammar with you guys. Wow. To teenagers, that was like, yay. Because we had Dutch grammar and German grammar and French grammar. I even had Latin and Greek, old Greek grammar. So we had our share of grammar, and this teacher was the coolest, right? We never missed a class. Because he would say, so there's this new song of the Beatles, Hey Jude or whatever, and let's talk about it. Let's, what did they mean writing that? And so we would debate, and he structured that somehow. I don't remember, and he would interrupt our conversations. For example, say, Maria, wait a moment. So you just made this, and he would go to the whiteboard and he would write the sentence that I just would have, or Maria would just have said, and said, well, this is correct, but you could also say it this way. He was teaching us grammar, but he'd never used a grammar book. He'd never called it grammar. And because of that, I'm a second language person, as many other Canadians. And I do correct a lot of Canadians with their English, even though I have no idea the structure or the grammar of it. Right? So we learned a different way, a language where I had a very traditional, and I don't think that good of a math teacher, and I picked up very little of it. Now, stubbornness in me, because I had a girlfriend who was brother studied at the University of Technology, and I thought his stories were cool. He was doing civil engineering. I thought, well, I can do that. That's what I want to do. So I graduated out of high school, and today it wouldn't happen, obviously. This is 1974. I graduated with a 50% for math and a 50% for science, and just because the chemistry teacher liked me, he gave me a 60. Well, I didn't deserve a 60. I deserved a 50. And I went to University of Technology, and I was accepted. I think back then, if you walked and talked, and you were accepted. I don't know why they accepted me, but they did. I went into industrial design engineering because I first registered for civil engineering, and then the same brother of my girlfriend said, oh, I was just a week at industrial design engineering. That's very multidisciplinary. This is cool stuff, da-da-da. And so I said, okay, that sounds better. And you could see how motivated I was, right? So I went into there, and the first 3 years is like a 3-year bachelor degree back then, and then you do 2 years master level. The first 3 years were close to mechanical engineering, but a lot of creative design, economy, psychology, a very multidisciplinary program. Back then, because in the first year they tried to bring creativity back to the students. So we had an assignment where we were given a mousetrap, and if you put the mousetrap tension on, you create energy, right? Then when the energy comes loose, we had to translate that energy in a cart going 50 meters. We were given carton with the 2 layers, and in the middle so it's strengths in certain ways and weakness in other ways. We had to make chairs. I barely dared to talk to my colleague students who were in mechanical and engineering, civil and mining, because they would think I was at kindergarten instead of at the university. People laughed about our program. Right now, that industrial design engineering is the biggest department of the University of Technology in Delft. It's the best known. It has summer schools with people coming from all over the world, master degrees, PhDs. It's the cat's meow of the university. Think about that, right? Because they did something that people laughed at, and now he is very important. So I'm at Seneca driving people crazy. I say, I want an industrial design program here, right? Why don't we do it? And people say, well, there's no job market. Well, in 1974, there was no job market for that either. It created, and if you don't do certain programs, you're not going to create that job market. There's no industrial designers in Canada. It's not offered. So what am I doing at Seneca is that I oversee all our international operations, and I'll explain a little bit why my stories are influenced, and I try to have it relevant for you as educators, specifically trying to make the people understand the need and the value of math and science. So I oversee all our international operations. For Seneca, that is a $100 million operation. on a $400 million budget. And I can guarantee you there's a fair profit margin on that. And without that profit, even Seneca, and I spoke to somebody from Humber, and would run deficits. I was 18 years at Niagara College. Niagara College is moving towards 50% international students. It's a population of 300,000 people in Niagara. They can't sustain what was started in the 60s, 70s. They would have to close programs, lay off people, and if you start doing that, you become less and less relevant as a community college. So the international students keep that going, partly because they pay, but also they bring influence from where they come from to our Canadian students. So it is financially important that we bring that money in, but it's also diversification and internationalization for our students. So at Niagara, because of the demographics and the kind of setting is there are not a lot of great math students going into Niagara, and they need tutoring. Like at any of our schools, there's peer tutoring. Well, all the international students at Niagara are math and science tutors, and they help our Canadian students succeed. At the same time, our Canadian students, even though they might have much lower GPAs when they graduate, they get the jobs. Why? Because they know people. And the international students don't know anybody. They might have very high GPAs, but they don't know anybody, and they're not necessarily getting the jobs. I'm interviewed a year ago by a Japanese magazine here in Toronto, and I didn't know and I didn't realize, but there are 3 Japanese language magazines here in Toronto. Mind-boggling, right? There must be some Greek language too.
Yes.
There you go. Any kind of language. So this Japanese magazine interview, because they say they get a lot of their Japanese students that have a difficulty finding a job, and they are top of the class, they graduate with 97, 98% average, and why did they get a job? I said, well, this is generalizing, but they're so with their nose in the books. They're so conditioned in Japan to have the highest grades, because in their culture that gets rewarded and gets them the job, not here. So they're not necessarily getting an interview, and if they get an interview, they stumble because everything is about academics. Well, the employers are not just looking for that. They're looking for wholesome people. They look for people that can problem solve and are creative and can interact with people. And so what my advice to students is that come from countries like Japan and Korea and China is that as soon as you get here and you're a bit of comfortable, start networking, start volunteering for organizations. Do things, because that's how you get to know people. And I don't want to say don't study hard, but maybe study a little less hard and invest in those other things. So I went to the university with that very poor foundation for math and science. Needless to say, I struggled, right? It wasn't pretty. My third year math, analytics, whatever it was so beyond me, but I needed to finish that in order to graduate. They were very tolerant, and they let me start my master's, which was, I had 4 choices. I could go further technical. Wow, that was clearly out of the picture. I could go creative, and I would have loved to do that, but I had 3 years of hand drawing, right? And it still, after 3 years, looked the same as when I started. I could go ergonomics. Back then, the man-machine interface was a big thing on design. Well, again, there was a lot of tech stuff, and I disqualified. So by default, I went business. That was the only one where they would take me. And they allowed me to already start my master courses, and then the 5th year was a full year, like a full capstone year where you worked in industry and made research and report on what you were doing in the industry. So I was 3 weeks away from defending my master thesis, and I still had to finish my 3rd year analytics. I think I by then had done it, I'm not exaggerating, I think it was the 10th time that I was doing that exam. In Holland, back then, I don't know if it's still there, and there's certainly less tolerance than when I was there, but you could do the exam in January, in May or June, and again in August. You had 3 moments you could do the exam, whether you followed the class or not. So you can see that in a few years you can rack up the number of exams you did. And I needed a 56% to pass, right? And I locked myself up for 3 weeks and bread and water and math, and I thought I got it. I think I got it now. And I had a 54%. So I went to see the instructor and I said, listen, I don't know if you know about me. He said, oh yeah, we know about you. We know about you. And I hear you're already doing your master thesis soon, right? So this is a bit of a pressure. I said, yeah. Anyhow, we walked through it. We spent an hour going through all the things. And what I ace is logic thinking. So you give me the book and the formulas, and I can solve a heck of a lot of even mathematical or science problems, right? But you ask me to memorize those bloody formulas, or whatever it is you need to solve the problem. Well, somewhere down the road I miss one and I go wrong, even though my logic till then is good and my logic afterwards is good, my answer is wrong. So that became very clear to him. I said, listen, you're good in logic thinking, why don't you memorize those formulas? Well, I don't know, I try, believe me, I try, but and so I think that but what happened then was he took his eraser and because it was penciled, he took it off and he put a 56% to get the hell out of here. So, and I think it was the right decision because I never in my career used that type of analytics, and it was clear that I was never going to use that, right? So there was no need to fail me while I've had clearly a successful career and being a good contributor to many different economies. So I think he took the right decision. Maybe I'm a bit biased on that, but so over time I think I more and more realized that I can't memorize well. Unless I have used the number 100 times, then it clicks somehow. So in today's world, there is so much more available that is digitized and is available. And you know, my family physician is a cool guy. He has the computer turned between me and him, and he punch in a bunch of things and the blood test and whatever, and then he walks me through my health chart. He's not pretending he knows it all. We walk through it together and he gives advice and he knows his way in it. But he's not pretending he knows everything about everything that is in medicine, because any doctor that does that, I would advise you to run very fast the other direction, because there is no way any doctor can do it. My daughter is a registered nurse, graduated 3 years ago, works in Emerge in Niagara Falls, and works with doctors who graduated 12, 13, 15 years ago. Interesting enough, in Emerge, all 8 doctors are foreign trained. Gives you food for thought. Why are there no Canadian trained in Emerge? It's the same reason that you will not find Canadian trained nurses in chronic or palliative care. Hard job. My daughter doesn't want to do it. It's too tough, she says. Thank you for all the students from India and Philippines and other countries that take care of our older and chronically sick people, because the Canadians wouldn't do it. Same thing with, so she says to these doctors, sometimes, I think that's wrong. And the doctor says, so who's the doctor in this room? Said, well, you, but I think you're wrong. And they look it up and they sometimes say, Hillary, you were right. And he says, of course I'm right. I'm just trained in this 2 years ago. Your training is 10 years ago. How can you think that you're still up to date, right? So the dialogue between professionals becomes very different. My son is graduating next month from electrical engineering, like my master's, and he's allowed the cheat sheets. And I wish I would have been allowed, because why would you memorize those formulas in today's world? What is the need to memorize those formulas? If it's all there, what we need to teach them is when to know how to use things. So my 15-year-old son, before he got to this stage, came back home from a class and said, this teacher of chemistry knows nothing. I said, wow, that's interesting. Why would you say that? Well, we have done this and the assignment is this, so I went on Google, and she's all wrong. Wow. So it was a good educational moment to say to my son, okay, how do you know what's there on Google is right? Why do you make, well, Google is always right. No, but we're raising generations that think like that, and not just in Canada, around the world. I was in Kyrgyzstan 2 years ago when we did a bid for an Aga Khan project there with the University of Central Asia. So the kids get taught till grade 11 by mostly Russian educated teachers. And we went in a class with 2 English teachers and the kids, and we would ask a question to the Russian teachers who didn't understand us, didn't understand our English. So the students whispered and translated for the teacher in Russian. And then you would expect the teacher at least to answer in English. No, they answered in Russian and let the students translate to us in English. These kids are learning English despite the teacher. Maybe the teacher teaches grammar in a Russian way about another language, but it's just beyond outdated kind of teaching. These kids, why do they learn English? Facebook, YouTube, name it. They teach themselves this stuff and can do better English than their teachers. Now, these are a bit of extreme examples, but the point is that the world is very fastly changing around us, right? And yes, of course, you still need to know the mechanics of math and the mechanics of a language. And I'm not arguing that you should do all the teaching like my hippie English teacher and not approach grammar. A lot of people like to have that grammar. I want to see the grammar book that explains to me why it's 1 arm and 2 arms, 1 hair, 2 hair, lots of hair, but lots of arms. Where's that in the grammar explained? And there's a lot of change if you look now in the Twitter effect of a language. So much language that didn't exist, and it creeps into the dictionaries because it's so much used, and it's living, and I'm sure it's the same as math and science, right? So I think that it is important to realize that these changes take place everywhere around us. I was in Tanzania, we do a project there, and I'll get to that in a moment, what kind of activities, why it's for the colleges important to do these kind of projects. I was in Tanzania and I'm in a coffee store, and like a good old-fashioned person, the same here. If I stand in the Starbucks or the Tim's, I have cash money, and around me everybody puts that plastic on a thing, and it's paid and magic. But I was in that store, and one guy does that in front of me, and another one says, okay, I've already paid you back. And he had his phone in, I'm thinking, so I asked him, how did you pay him back? He said, well, I pay him back on the phone. So the telecom companies in Southern Africa have started banking. So you can deposit money on your telephone account, and I can send you the money, the $2 for the coffee, that way. We don't even have that here, right? Not that I know of. Tanzania. I was just spending 2 weeks in India, and there are phenomenal things happening in India, as much as it's also still an enormous amount of poverty. You've got 1.3 billion people. How on earth can a country ever function, right? So if China functions with that amount of people because it's not a democracy. It's a top-down system that is easing up a little bit now, but it's been a very undemocratic system. India has always been a democracy with all its challenges, all its violences, all its ups and downs, but it's a democracy, and somehow it functions. So who has heard of a company called Tata? Wow, I'm impressed. Well, you have Indian background. All right, so you're discounted. So I can put 100 Canadians not with Indo-Canadian background, and they say that's baby language. Well, it's a big company. So then I say, okay, who knows General Motors? Who knows General Motors? Well, obviously everybody, right? And who thinks that General Motors is the biggest car manufacturer in the world? You can see it coming, you're logical people. That's not fair, because in most audience people say, well, General Motors, sure, that's the biggest. Well, Tata is bigger, right? Tata in India is a bigger car manufacturer and diverse company than General Motors. India, right? Most of the IT businesses we all know in the US were started by immigrants from India who were frustrated in the old Indian system of very anti-entrepreneurial and came to Canada, came to the US where it's obviously much more entrepreneurial environment and excelled in the IT industry. These things are not always recognized, right? So I have dealt a lot with the media in my life. So let me give you a little bit of my background. I told you my high school and my university, and not to be much proud of that, but I got through it. When I was doing one of my internships, I had an opportunity to go to South Africa. This was in 1980. And if you go back in the history books, 1980 was still apartheid in South Africa. And so I come from a country where the Afrikaners have a lot of Dutch heritage, and so they were quite active in that apartheid thinking. And if you come from Holland, it's sort of intriguing, but you don't realize, because in the 70s, 80s, Holland was a super welfare state. And it still happens sometimes in Holland that you can earn more being in welfare than minimum wage. And anybody here will argue that can't work. Any economist will argue with me that can't work. Well, it works. Because if you have that strong of a social democratic safety net for people, you have very little crime and very little poverty. And people on welfare can go to a vacation in Spain on the bus. Doesn't cost much, but they feel human. And they don't have to be desperate, like in North America some people are, that live in parks and all sort of things. So coming from there, going into South Africa was like a mega shock, right? To see 10% of the people run the country and 90% have no rights. Being in a restaurant where the colored and black people had to sit outside. And it's something to see it on a movie or read about it. I can tell you it's something different to sit in it and sort of say, I'm trying to understand this, but explain this to me, right? So, and people would all want to converse, because at that moment they had an international boycott, and they were very happy to get people in and look at what the reality is. So the Afrikaners would explain their stories, where they started out as agricultural people for the Dutch boats and the French boats that would go to the Far East and supply food, and then the Brits came and kicked them out, and then they went further land inwards and met the Zulus who came from the south, and they fought hard, and by the time the Dutch farmers with the guns had beaten the Zulus, the British army came in again and said, okay, that's good, now we'll take it over. And so they were hating the Anglophone South Africans as pure opportunists that took over from all their hard work. Very deep dug in wrong ideas that they made that country. But you can understand where it came from. They were wrong, dead wrong, but you could see where they come from. The Anglophone South Africans all want to change, but too opportunistic to really push for it. And then the vast majority of black South Africans, where I would sit in a truck hitchhiking, and the truck driver said, listen, I would love to vote and I hope we change, but I got a better life than most of my brothers and sisters in the rest of Africa. So you have those emotions only when you're really there. And I thought, I'm 24, almost 25, and I feel I know nothing about the world. So I went to the bank. When I came back, I finished my studies. I went to the bank and said, what's the maximum loan you can give me? And I said, $25,000. Good, I'll take it. And they said, oh, you're starting a business? I said, no, I'm going to backpack travel. Okay, well, as long as your parents sign for the guarantor, it's all good with us, right? So my parents signed after a little bit of convincing, and I backpacked around the world for a year. I went with some friends through Northern Africa, drove through Sahara Desert, went into Cameroon with a car. We sold the car, flew to Kenya, went to India. Little side story, at the train station in India, what was then Bombay, I met this cute Canadian young woman, and long story short, we're married 26 years, and that's why I came to Canada. So thank you, India. traveled in Southeast Asia, worked a few months in Sydney, Australia, and then traveled South America. And in that year, I think I shaped my brains, even though my brains were exploding and didn't really know what I was doing with it. I then had to pay back the $25,000, so I had to find a job, and I started with some colleagues in industrial design. But within the first year, the same brother who inspired me to go to University of Technology said, I work for this aircraft manufacturer called Fokker. You should work with us. And I said, why would Fokker ever hire me? I don't know the front and the back of a plane. I sit in it. I don't like it, but believe me, we need guys like you who have been out in the world that have. So I got the job after 3 rounds of interviews, and we never talked about my studies. Thank God we never talked about my marks. And all the conversations were about my travel. I got the job because I traveled, and they wanted to know how I survived difficulties and what obstacles I met and all those kind of things. And here I'm airline analyst, says my business card, and they sent me off around the world. My area was Latin America, so I spent most of my time in Argentina, Brazil, Mexico, and a bit in Spain. My boss said, if I see you here more than 50%, I fire your ass, because, oops. I fire you, because you're supposed to be out there. This is what we hired you for. Go meet those airlines, check what they want, why and when they want to replace planes, earn their respect, and then we send in the sales team. So I was like a paratrooper of this commercial company. And now here I have a problem, because I'm not really an economist. I'm not really I'm an engineer, but I'm not that well on that topic, certainly not when it comes to aircraft. So here's what I do. I don't lie, I tell half truth. You can punish me for that too. So I would go to the maintenance people of the airline, and I would say, listen, I'm just an economist, right? I'm not lying. I did an MBA for engineers, so. And then I talk quite a bit of the tech talk, right? Because I know engineers, I know engineering talk. I might not be good at solving the problems, but I talk the talk. So they thought, but this is a cool economist, we can work with him. Yeah, sure, And then I would go to the commercial people, the planners of an airline, and they see a plane pure as a bunch of seats that they can maximize routes on and make profit for the company. They're not aircraft maniacs. So I would say, well, listen, I'm just an engineer. Don't be too hard on me. And then I would talk a lot of economic stuff, and they said, well, we like this engineer. So I learned the tricks of gaining trust and cooperation during that job. And of course I was around the world, and this time I got paid, and actually flew business class and all those great things. I knew after 5 years that wasn't really what my destiny was. I'm not hard commercial. I noticed things in that industry that you might have the best plane, but you're not going to sell, because those planes were $30–40 million. The airlines were talking about 10 to 20 planes. That's a lot of money. So they would say, okay, we buy this from this Dutch company. What is Holland BV, Holland Incorporated, buying back from us? How is that trade balance there? And so that's a logical reason sometimes. We tried to sell to Iberia, the Spanish airline, 100 of the Fokker 100s. They had to replace the DC-9s. We lost from McDonnell Douglas because McDonnell Douglas has a strong influence in the military production in the US. The US government had F-16s as part of the NATO mandate. Just before we started, the Spanish Prime Minister was voted in by saying no to OTAN. In other words, we're going out of the NATO socialist agenda. Once he got voted in, he of course could not say no to NATO, so he had to find something else. So he negotiated with the Americans that they would take out their F-16s, and he would put his own, and he could say to the Spanish, see, we take care of our own things. Because of that, they sold their McDonnell Douglas planes, because they were, none of the technical or the commercial people in Iberia wanted to buy those planes. So despite all the great knowledge and skills that we displayed, we didn't sell. And those are kind of important things to realize throughout your career. I then went 7 years to work for an organization that I by accident got in because I was looking for a job at the United Nations. I had an offer through United Nations Volunteers in the Pacific for UNDP, United Nations Development Program. And 3 weeks, I'd been ticketed and everything, and 3 weeks before I would leave, they called me and said, oh, sorry, you're bumped by somebody from internally UN, but we'll call you soon, there'll be other opportunities. That evening I'm at a party, I tell people that story. One of the people in the audience is the treasurer of a small organization called Doctors Without Borders. They had just started. Said, that's interesting, would you want to work for us? Because as a treasurer, I look at the books, and all these doctors and nurses are great people, but they don't know how to handle the books, and I have to justify this to the auditors, and we need people like you. So I ended up in Mozambique. At that moment, a country in war already for some 30 years, devastated. It was the number last on the United Nations Index of countries, the poorest country of the world at that moment. And I had to go to the depth of my creativity. I was 32, I was in charge of all the logistics of a country where we were using $4 million in relief operations, rebuilding hospitals, 60 doctors and nurses, expats, and 300 non-medical staff on payroll rebuilding airports, hospitals, and we had a couple of little airplanes. We had our own radio shortwave network because nothing functioned in the country. I was 32. The average age of MSF, Doctors Without Borders people, Médecins Sans Frontières people, was 28. A real young dogs organization. Nowadays, the average age is 38. So it's still a very young organization, but it matured a little bit compared to when I started. And I had to go absolute to the depth of my problem solving and creativity to make things work there. And I could tell you a million stories of those 2 years. I think those 2 years by far have been the most difficult 2 years in my career. And I was a basket case after those 2 years. That's where my wife and I decided to marry, and I came here to Canada, and the Europeans asked me to set up MSF Canada. So I incorporated Doctors Without Borders in Canada as a hired gun. It wasn't my idea, I just came to get it going, and it's a very flourishing and well-respected organization here in Canada. I did that for 3 years, and then I was Director HR and Training for MSF Holland in Amsterdam. And during that 2 years, I was asked to restructure the organization because it didn't have an HR department. And so as an organizational designer, I was started, and then 6 months in my mandate, Rwanda genocide happened. And the Rwanda genocide was a horrific thing where 1 million people suddenly ended up in a very small place on the border with Zaire, now Congo, and the Zaire army didn't let them in. And so there was a little lake where they did everything. And so you would have within 2 or 3 weeks cholera and all sort of terrible things. You would have had next to the people, the 1 million that were butchered, you would have another 1 million dying in the camp. So we had doctors going with them, they radioed. Within 2 days we had our first Antonov going there with field hospitals and people, and we had within 3 or 4 weeks we had 400 people working there. I didn't come out of the office for weeks. And so, because we called hospitals and tried to get doctors for 2 or 3 weeks, and the others would take over their vacation shifts, and then we started kicking into a long term. After 3 months, all the other organizations came in. After 3 months, so MSF wouldn't have been there. They would have found a lot of dead bodies. World Food Program would come with food, but there was no need anymore. World Health Organization would come, but with the dead bodies, it would just be cleaning. So MSF is there as that ambulance driver, takes care of things and then helps structuring. In that camp were thousands and thousands of Interahamwe, which did the genocide, and they still ran the camp. So MSF then took on its bold shoes and said, unless something is done with these Interahamwe people, we can't keep working here. Nobody else wanted to do it because at the end of the day, there might be 10,000 Interahamwe, but that leaves, what is the mass? 900, a lot of millions still, or a lot of thousands of people that get caught. So we knew that there was care for them, and we could make the political statement to walk out. And because of that, the International Tribunal in Tanzania was started in Arusha, and that was one of the first times, certainly in African history, that war crimes were going in front of a tribunal. I was part of that, and it's hard to realize even today that I was part of that. But my wife said, okay, you know what, we got 2 little kids, something is gonna give, right? And I said, okay, 7 years enough. I came to Canada at age 39, and I thought I was quite experienced by then. These stories that I share should give you an impression that that's an interesting resume at least, right? So I thought, okay, I'm gonna go back to private industry maybe. I didn't think about education. With my background in education, I'd barely dared to step into a place like Seneca. So I was looking for work in commerce again, and I wrote literally hundreds of reactions, and I didn't get any invitations. I got one invitation from a place called Niagara College, but I thought, nah, that's not for me. So I went to see here in Toronto some HR people, and I said, what is this? I'm almost 40. I think I have interesting experience. Why does nobody invite me? And well, the network thing we already talked about, but they also had some other things, which now 20-something years later is better. But they said, well, you don't have a Canadian credential. I said, did you see what university I studied? I didn't say I wasn't very good, but did you see the university? Like, how can you say that that degree is not, wow, but you know how it is here, these engineers and, yeah, okay, let that go. They said, well, you worked almost 10 years in Africa. That's really nice. You helped save some lives, but that wasn't serious work. What? Are you want me to kill you here? Okay, I accept. People don't understand what it is. I give you a little bit of an insight, but I could give you a lot more stories that you would appreciate the work done, right? I can't because I don't have enough time. But so then I said, okay, my last trump card. I don't want to use the word Trump, sorry. Really, that just slipped out there. My last card would be, I speak 6 languages. And people said, yeah, we speak English here. So I said, okay, what advice do you give me? And they said, listen, have you any offers? I said, well, I've got this offer in Niagara College, but take it. Take it. Take it and prove yourself. And that was the best piece of advice. So I decided to take the job at Niagara with very small college, 50 million, about 5,000 students, 50 million budget or operational budget, 5 million in the hole, really mismanaged. I joined the local Rotary after I accepted the job, and I was sitting on the table. So what do you do here? Oh, I just got a job at Niagara College. I'm quite excited. Well, you have to be excited. They said, oh, you can find something else? You go to Niagara now, Niagara College is just beyond popular. It's just a hip-hopping place. They bring a lot of people in from around the world. These international students spend lots of money in the restaurants and the clothes and the cars, and it's part of the revival of Niagara. So I helped doing that, and I'll spare you all the details, but I worked on that diligently. The first 3-4 years, I wanted to run screaming out of the building because I came from this very dynamic world. In the aircraft manufacturing, we never talked about budget. My boss says, you do what it takes. So I had once a presentation with slides before the PowerPoint. I had 8 slide projectors going like that. And it cost $40,000, just that it was 5 minutes. $40,000 for a presentation, right? So I had very skewed ideas about budget. Then I worked in MSF for 7 years, and we also, we worked on, back then we had about a $300 million budget. Nowadays it's over $1 billion. And we spend literally 1 day on our budget, annual budget, 1 day. And okay, we agree, let's move. Here, in the colleges, we take 4 or 5 months. The complexity of colleges are big, so I'm not talking negative about it, but it was something to get used to. Then I would, of course, not really being an educator and trying to sort of bring some novel ideas. I think they called me within 6 or 7 months. Dan Patterson, already then the president, called me in and said, listen, I hired you for a reason. You got to change things, but you can't change this place in like 6 months, right? It might take you 6 years. And you've ever heard of the word somebody being a faculty basher? I said, I don't know what that means. Well, he explains, right? That in the union, your name came through as a faculty basher. I said, well, why is that? Well, Niagara has a journalism program, a 2-year journalism program, and students do a newspaper. So they practice and they interviewed me. And this girl quoted me, I think not completely correct, but that's okay, they're a student. And I said something like, some of the teachers are a bit stuck in their thinking. Because I had all sort of ideas, and they said, well, that doesn't work here. And so I made that sentence. I learned quickly not to say those things, certainly not to a journalism student who would put it in those newspapers go in the Avondales in Welland, right? So, I had a lot of those bloody noses because I had to learn to function in this environment that is very different, and not everybody would right away give me credit for because of what I had done, right? So eventually got the motor going at Niagara, and it's now a $60 million operation, international loan on a $130 million operation. They run 4 campuses in Saudi, and you can discuss whether that's good or bad, but it's technical training for a population that has never been taught to actually work for their money. They went from Bedouins to suddenly being oil sheikhs, and they just pay everybody, and they bring in labor from elsewhere. They know now that that's not going to last forever, so they work on what they call Saudization to get their people to learn and become workers. Well, that doesn't go overnight. And so Algonquin got criticized, and so does Niagara, for working there. Now, I say, as taxpayers, if you okay that your company, or your country, sells these weapon cars or whatever, these armored cars, because we save 10,000 jobs with that, and you're going to hack on these little schools that actually do some training with people, come on, think about it, right? So you would have to have those kind of thoughts in today's world that you put it in perspective. And I helped with Niagara building that. 3 years ago, I was asked here to come to Seneca. Seneca does an enormous amount of student recruitment. Of the 28,000 full-time students, we have 7,000 international students. That's phenomenal. It's more than some colleges have in total numbers of students. And so when I was invited to interview, I said, well, if you're looking for somebody just to run the recruitment, you don't need me. There's lots of people that can do that. They said, no, we hear what you're doing at Niagara. You're doing projects around the world, development projects with Canadian money. You do things with the World Bank. You do all sort of cool contracts. You got 700 students from Niagara going around the world on exchanges and field trips and all sort of learning experiences. We want that at Seneca. Okay, so I'm building that, and I'm having lots of fun. And thanks to colleagues like Maria, we get teachers and others interested in being part of that. So that's what I'm doing. It's very simple because a student helped me set it up. I said, listen, I'm not into all this social media. I have a Facebook because my daughter set it up. I have no idea how to work it, but I go on it. But I want to do this blog. We asked the students at Niagara to make a blog when they go out, and once a week they have to make an entry. So I want to do that because I'm going to Colombia in 2000. So we're 2012, I got a contract to work a year for the government of Canada in Colombia on a project that has to do with informal mining. And so all of 2013 I was in Colombia, and I wanted to document that, and I thought the blog was cool. So that's why I called it Digging for Gold, because the mine workers were all digging for gold. And if you go back far enough, you'll see the stories. And it was just like going back to MSF. I was in communities there in Colombia that are not even on the formal map of the country. 20,000 people digging for gold. All with mercury flows through the streets. There's nothing formal in those villages. They're officially not towns according to the government. They're all illegal miners. They're all informal miners. Illegal is a harsh word to say. They're informal miners. They were campesinos, they were farmers, but it's hard to make a living as a farmer. And so digging for some gold pays off. Even if you die at 40, you got a good 40 years. They die because of the mercury, right? And we had to try to get them ready for the Peace Accord that things would change. Because in Colombia, 80% of the mining rights are with Canadian mining companies, junior mining companies. So the structure of the mining around the world is that the big mining companies don't do all the difficult work. They let junior mining companies explore. Not all the mines are what the geologists say. So if it's a bust, the junior mining company goes out of business. That's fine. They can start another one. The big companies don't want to take those risks. If they hit a good gold mine for 20, 30 years, then the big mining companies buy up the junior ones. The Toronto Stock Exchange is the central stock exchange on mining. The Canadians obviously have a lot of stake in it. Now with the Peace Accord in Colombia, they're going to go there. They're going to start exploring and mining. Right now, there are some of the geologists say that Colombia has the richest gold deposits of the world, and they're only mining 4 to 5%. And with that 4 to 5%, these informal miners, they're already polluting the Rio Magdalena so badly that the corals are dying off in front of the coast. This is only 4 or 5% of the mining because they use the mercury. They can't afford these fancy things, but these companies will come in and do it cleaner, like we do here in Canada, cleaner, right? Please, as an engineer, don't ever believe any politician telling you that there are safe pipelines. There is no such a thing. We don't have better alternatives, and like Justin Trudeau says, transporting with the train also has risk. Any transport of that stuff has a risk. You cannot buy in that it's safe. It's not going to be safe. Engineers make it as safe as possible. What happens with a pipeline? It's welded, right? So it's welders that they're top-notch welders, men and women. But they might have a dispute with their spouse or with their child or whatever. And that they're emotional. And of course, Murphy's Law will be that they have to do a really difficult weld in a difficult circumstance in the rocks and the forest. And that weld is not as good as they normally do. And the weakest link is where it breaks. Now, the X-ray those things all the time. Engineers you can trust them as long as you know they're human, just like math teachers, you say, they're human. There will be a weak point somewhere. Now, the X-raying is there to find the weak points and fix it. But of course, Murphy's Law, where this weld was done really on a difficult day, is also difficult to X-ray. And some of them say, that's okay. It's not okay, because that's where it's going to break, and of course that's in a natural park or whatever, and we get all the damage. So the same for mining. There is no such thing as safe mining, but safer and cleaner, yes, right? So these Canadian companies come in, and I was asked to help the National Training Organization to get these informal miners interested in training themselves for jobs with these businesses. While they treated me like the enemy, and I did a bit of the trick like earlier with the economist and the engineer. I said, listen, I'm Dutch. I work for the Canadian government, I'm Dutch, right? Don't shoot me, okay? It's just, they're bad people, these Canadians, but yeah, I'm trying to help them, and I'm trying to help you. Now, I'm just joking, but the whole idea was I went into pretty volatile areas with military escorts, and because these miners see the Canadian mining companies as the enemy. They're going to take away their livelihood. That's how they see it. Until they get better trained, they're so untrained. They dig in the ground tunnels under the houses, and the houses collapse. Right? That none of them have ever done a class in math, not even one class. Most of them have no education whatsoever. So you can't expect them to change their mind if you don't help a bit. And that project it's still ongoing. I just was there to start it up. So that's why I called the blog Digging for Gold. And I wanted to give my friends here in Canada and my family in Holland an idea with what I was doing. So the blog is just photos and little comments. And you can see on the site is that blogspot, so julesnodded.blogspot.ca. On the right hand, you can see the years that I started and how many posts I made. And if you click on it, you can search and find and whatever. You can just scroll back. And it just goes all the time. So my latest, and I'm not going to go through it because I'm almost through my time. I just made one today about here in the building, the aviation, the in-flight service program, because I've just been so much in planes. And there's an incredible amount of growth in the hospitality industry around the world. And maybe I'll close on that note, because it's not a good food for thought, right? In Holland, we brought people from Morocco and Turkey when I was little, because the Dutch people didn't want to collect garbage. We're too good for that. So let's import some labor and they will do it for us. We now have a mayor of the city of Rotterdam, which is the most important city in Holland, economically, sorry. He's 5th generation Moroccan. He's like the mayor of Calgary, same type of person. It's probably the best mayor we have ever had, and the Dutch call him the Obama of Holland. He was a few weeks in office, and he did a press conference, and my sister sent me a clip because it was so hilarious. He went out in public and said, listen, yes, I'm Moroccan descent, yes, I'm Muslim, and that's my raising, and I'm proud of it, but I'm Dutch, okay, I'm Dutch. There's nothing Moroccan on me, really. It's just a heritage. It's like most Canadians come from somewhere. Sorry, you come from Holland. Tough luck.
Yeah.
I'm the mayor for all the people in this city. So please, people from Morocco and Turkey, stop coming in my office and asking me for favors. Because I'm not giving you those favors just because I'm Moroccan, right? It's not going to work like that. Please don't. You get time like anybody else. And then to the rest of Holland, please, I'm Dutch. Don't call me this foreign labor or whatever. Like, I run this city for you, I'm elected, and let's get on with it, right? So these kind of things happen everywhere, and I think that the integration of the mobility of people around the world is just tremendous, and the studying in Canada accelerates that. So we have to be careful that we use that in the right way, and whether you're a math teacher, a science teacher, or an English teacher, or an electrical teacher, it doesn't really matter. We got to tell to the students that this is their world, this is changing, and they need to have soft skills, or whatever we call it now, that their work group will be from people from around the world. So my son, as I said, is graduating electrical engineering at McMaster's. He started 100, they're 50 graduating. They're about 5 or 6 white guys. This is my son's. So a lot of students from Asia, and quite a few from African continent, and he says, Dad, all of us 5 white guys are just really stupid compared to these guys if it comes to math, and they just put us so to shame, and actually some of them helped me go through the study. They tutor me, and that's how I succeed. But we're kind of the cool guys because we're doing maybe more on sports, or we're more connected, and we do the volunteering, so we need each other. I said, perfect, that's gonna be your work world too, right? You will work with a lot of smarter people, and they have certain skills, but they also don't have skills that you have. And it's a little bit your upbringing, it's a little bit of me pushing you into this study, because I knew you wouldn't be a great engineer. But it worked for me, and it might work for you, because he was doing math at high school without doing any effort. He spent more time calculating an 85% average so he could go into McMaster's than actually studying for the course. It drove me nuts, right? I said, listen, if I would have had your brains, I wouldn't have had to tell these stories I tell tonight. So why don't you just study for the course? Anyhow, so he could do it. I knew he could do it, and he did it. But the interesting thing is how he pictures his fellow students. And it's very important that we all explain that to our students. So we're going to lose 40,000 production jobs, and you can't get too depressed about it. It's going to happen. It's not if, it's more when. And there will be other jobs created, and everybody will need to learn to work with artificial intelligence one way or the other. They all need to learn the basics of it without becoming experts on it. They need to understand what the bitcoins and blockchains and whatever kind of things are without really being experts in it, because they can look it up, but they have to understand what they look up, and all of those kind of things are there. The hospitality is not a high-paying industry, certainly not when you start. But in today's world, that hospitality industry and the travel and the hotels and the tourism are very sophisticated companies. They do lots of things where you need math and statistics and analytics of finance and profit optimization and all those good things. There's also a lot of technology in all these businesses. It's not just about being friendly to people, it's also understanding those principles. And so my blog today, my post today is about that, because I've just been on the road so much the past few months. You see everywhere new airports being built. The airlines, like in India, is exploding, the amount of airlines. China has, in Beijing, 2 airports already that both put the Toronto airport as a small airport, and they're building a 3rd one. China has rolled out their first commercial aircraft now, so they're going to produce. So good luck to McDonald's and Boeing and Airbus, because that avalanche is coming too, and they're going to take over those jobs. But we still have a leading advance in innovation and a lot of those things. And the hospitality service industry is going to be a growth market. So my blog post today was just to defend that industry a bit. We got some cool programs here with a colleague from Maria, who put postgrad programs together for international students, where you can do a co-op and then do another one, 2nd term, and then you have that 2-year study and you can get a 3-year work permit. They all finding work because the jobs are there, whether the Canadians agree or not. And yesterday morning I had a dean's meeting, and we had argument about a 3rd program in that mix. Well, there's no jobs in there. So I disagree. The jobs are there, the Canadians, but we don't have Canadian students that are interested. Well, that's their mistake. And maybe these international students will put their nose on it, that there are jobs and they're good careers to have. So we collectively need to help our youth and new immigrants to realize that diversity in the job market. So that's, I think, where we all, whether you're a math teacher, English teacher, or a different teacher, we have that obligation. I'm a pain in the butt in the dean's meeting because I bring up these things. I think we should do an industrial design and program, and they say there's no job market. I say, well, it's chicken and the egg. If you don't start training people, it's not going to ever be a job market, and you lose out on innovative stuff. I'll stop there. You can look at that blog if you're interested. It's mostly photos with very short little things in which I don't go too much in detail. My purpose today was to talk a bit about internationalization. I hope it made some sense to you. I hope you disagreed about some things I say, because if you agree with everything, then you forget it on the ride back home. If you disagree, then you're going to think about it and maybe contact me and said, I want to talk more about that. In a setting in India, and we do a lot of talks and workshops on leadership in education. And so part of my talking I do in different settings, different audiences, but it is all about, I'm campaigning against memorization. I think it's a very outdated way of learning. And I'm sure lots of you will disagree with me, but I'm stubbornly sticking to it. I believe in excelling our students to learn logical thinking, critical thinking, and creativity, because those will be the requirements for the jobs in the future. With the tsunami of artificial intelligence coming over us. Let me tell you one more story, right? So who would step in an aircraft, a passenger aircraft without pilots? Good. That's 4 more than in most audiences. And why do you think, why would you do it? Thank you. So when I worked for Fokker, this is 30-something years ago, right? They already had the cockpits. The Airbus really made the change there, and now it's by everybody. The cockpits are so safe without going in. Well, the cockpits is not the whole plane, but it steers the plane, right? If you look at accidents of aircraft over the last 30 years, 25, 30 years, 100% of them are pilot errors. Pilots who turn off the computers because they think they can do better or they want to keep the feel still. Only accidents happen, for example, that plane that flew over the first time over a volcano and got the ashes into the 4 engines and suddenly lost all 4 engines. That had never happened before. That pilot figured it out before they hit the ocean. All of that went into the software of cockpits around the world. So if that would happen today, you would barely notice, because the computer within a couple of seconds has that resolved. There's no human being that can do that, right? The movie about the pilot that put it in the Hudson River in New York is a good extra story, because he proved the computer wrong. But all that went into the computers again, and next time the computer will have it right. This is the kind of world we're going into. So what's the point of memorization? What's the point of learning certain things to a certain degree? I had a construction engineering teacher who was teaching us about the strength of a bolt and a thing of two plates, metal, and with pressure on it, and we had to calculate all the tension and whatever. And he had a slide ruler. Does anybody remember a slide ruler? Poor torture, no? Amazing, sophisticated little thing, but pure torture. So I had two rich students in my class, because in 1974 the pocket calculators were worth like $800-900, right? So I didn't have one for sure, but the one kid in the class that had it typed in the numbers and would say, "Prof," or whatever, "it's 8.314." And a prof would ignore us and go on, and then he would write on the board, "It's 8.3139. Give me a break. The slide ruler is more exactly the resistance against that has always been there. There's nothing new to it, and I witnessed it, and I think I witness it now too. So anybody want to disagree or ask more stories? I can go on forever. Please.
Within our own schools and within our own faculties, if you are a similar mindset, how can you help to generate a forward motion with some of that thinking? What would be some advice you could give us?
Yeah, and I'm going always on thin ice, and I'm equally nervous talking to people that make their living out of math, as I said in the beginning. So when I talk to teachers and try to give advice, it's a bit dicey, because I know I've now in 20 years learned how difficult the job is to teach, more than ever before. I respect it deeply, so if I have ironic remarks or whatever, please, that's just me trying to be funny, but I have a deep respect. So, but I do think that there's so much changing, and that teachers need to embrace that change, even though their comfort zone is not there, right? So I think we need to accelerate being able to step out of the comfort zone to have our students find their way in the complexity of information. They still will have to understand the mechanics of math equations and whatever, but please don't ask them to memorize the formula. Why would they, right? And so surgery is done with computers too, but the surgeon still has that emotional element and said, okay, I'm not feeling good about this, right? So that's whatever level of people, we need to train them on that. They still need to understand math, they understand the language. Those are basics of our human being and basics of creativity and critical thinking. So you don't have that, you can't do critical thinking, right? You have to have a debate, is 1 and 1 is 2? Maybe not. So let's debate it. Why on first do we always say 1 and 1 is 2? Right? So that's the debates, rather than say, well, 1 and 1 is 2, because it's always been like that and it always will be like that. That's the wrong kind of attitude, right? So I'm not sure if I'm answering your question, but it is about going out of the box. And in my presentation in India, I basically had one slide that says globalization equals out of the box. So even India is a huge country, well, not as big geographically, but population-wise. I think, but the mistake you guys make is you stay in your box. If it's not Indian-made, it can't be good. Well, that's a mistake. And if you teach people that, and you teach people in India still very much memorization, and they come here to Canada and they get punished for memorization. Well, they don't get punished for memorization, but when they copy it literally on your test without referencing or put 80% quotes and a little bit of themselves, you're not going to appreciate that as a teacher, because it shows little creative thinking. They 1 or 2 quotes to make an argument, that's what you want to see. But they're not, in India, they're rewarded for memorization. Right? So I said that alone, you got to drastically change if you want to keep up with your current role in the world. Indian finance has, I think, purchased most of the forestry in Canada. You are leaders in the world. And so you got to think out of the box. In Canada, my message is more, you might think you're leaders of the world because you're part of G8, but yeah, G8 was, I hate to break it with you, but it's a bit of history, right? It's not the leaders anymore. They still run the Security Council and those kind of things, but they're not the leaders anymore. Canada needs to go the reverse, right? They need to say, we need to embrace all that foreign knowledge. We have certain strengths that we need to embed. I think the Canada arm in this space is brilliant. That's the kind of things we need to find. Nortel was a leader, but went bankrupt because of poor management. So that's maybe, and BlackBerry, almost the same. They might survive, but they were innovators and then fell asleep. So maybe as a country, because I come from a country with no resources, and I landed in this country with, you can't imagine Canada without trees or fresh water. So what's the incentive to do something about it? I was just talking to one of your colleagues. I don't know if it's at other colleges, and maybe I shouldn't say, but I'm going to say it. So I'm working many times in the evening, and I see the cleaners in office with all these neat, different garbage things, right? Mm-hmm. And she puts it all back in one bag. Yeah. I said, no, wait. She says, sorry, but it all goes in the same truck. Because, and then I investigate a bit, and what I understand is that the GTA lacks recycling plants. And so it's nice we do it, and I don't argue we should, because at least psychologically we're ready. If we get the plants, then we have our mindset to it. In Niagara, there's good plants, and they have reduced the landfill with 70% because of this, right? So, you know, it is all relative, but it has to do with mindset, and I think Canadian teachers should be realistic about what they teach. So I did at Niagara an English business course when I started in 95, 96. McGraw-Hill book, it was about case studies, great book, great teacher. Every single case study was a North American company. So it irked me as a European. I said, well, you know what? It's great, but it's not the only way of good corporate communication, right? Why don't you put Nokia as an example, or IKEA, or Hyundai, or Tata? Tata has problems, and they resolve it with communication. So I wrote the teacher said, listen, I'm told to work with this book, I'm sorry. And I said, it's a good book, but I would love to have, so write a letter to McGraw-Hill. Well, I did, never got an answer, but what I would say is, you got to get materials from elsewhere, and the internet is probably the easiest source. So when I was at a university, we had some books in German or French, and we complained as Dutch students, hey, listen, we're Dutch here, right? But why, can you translate that stuff? Then it's easier for us. The teacher would say, 9074, right? I said, well, if you don't speak those languages, you got a big problem. So no, I'm not going to waste my time translating that. That's the best material. And you do it in that language. Now, that's maybe a bit of a stretch for the Anglophone communities, right? So, but it's just as a thought that 40 years ago, those kind of countries were there. So my university has the highest degree of patents per student, highest number of patents per student. Do the Dutch make any of it? Barely. They just sell the patent and get royalties the rest of whatever the negotiation is. Canada has a make culture, right? We produce things. We still have car manufacturing in a country that has one of the highest education levels. Now, I'm not saying that we should kick out all those car manufactured jobs. You can't just do it. But when I was little, the Dutch government stopped mining, and it was revolt, because I remember black and white television, miners striking and saying, my dad worked in a mine, my grandfather, you're taking away a livelihood. It was the poorest province of Holland. They changed it into the conference center. The European Union was born there. It's the best economy in Holland now, because the government had a plan B. Rotterdam was a shipbuilding city, the best of the world, until the Koreans and Japanese got into it and put us to poverty. And then the government said, we're going to stop the shipbuilding, we're going to build a container terminal, and we're going to be the main transport of containers into Europe. Again, way healthier work, way healthier. So I think Canada needs to revisit its economic structure. It's exporting trees and things and then buys from the Americans finished products. We make cars. Anyhow. So I think we need young generations that are willing to think out of the box, and they're not going to do it because most of their homes wouldn't stimulate them. I think it's your job to, and maybe change your marking system so that if they have wild ideas, they get marked for it, even though the idea will never work. But to stimulate them, right? Yeah.
I just wanted to share, I'm not disputing about memorization and things like that, but Indian students, they have excellent logic system built in their head.
Mm-hmm.
No doubt about that. I give a simple problem like what is 15% of 20, an Indian student will do it right away. But Canadians have to take their phones, they have to take their cell phone, they have to take their calculator and seem to be struggling. I'm just wanting to share that there is a very good part in Indian education.
Yeah.
I have done my master's in physics, electronics, without a calculator.
Yeah.
I have used logs and anti-logs, and I've done problems faster than a calculator. Let me tell you that. So it's best of both worlds.
Yeah.
Some things work, some things don't work. So you know what? Not all of memorization is bad. There is good parts to it. And I think we should acknowledge that.
Fully agree with you. I do think for a lot of people, memorization doesn't work.
Yeah, it's not memorization. What happens is it built in. Like when I'm doing my work in log, like log 2, it's already there because many times I've used it, and it's not about that, but the application, what we do, it comes like that. Mm-hmm. And here, I'm struggling to get that application in my students. Believe me, I sit and work with my kids to get that concept in their mind and tell them, keep your cell phones away, keep your things away. Come on, do it. Think, you can do this, you can do that.
Good point.
So, you know what? And we know we have a lot of projects in the schools. We're having a lot of problems with the math in the schools because it's not building up to what we want at the post-secondary educational level. So it's not about memorization, but there has to be some change about the way they look at the logic build up, you know?
Yeah.
I just wanted to share.
No, it's great.
Wanted to share these things.
Listen, I fully agree that the focus has to be on the logic thinking, and with some that they have a good knack for memorization, then it goes easier, right? And others don't, and there should be other ways to also help them because.
But it's unfortunate that our Canadian school system doesn't foster memorization. Memorization isn't something you're just born with. You can learn it and become better at it.
Absolutely.
And people aren't trained with that anymore. So in my math class, my Canadian students have to check on their calculator that 2 times 3 really was 6, but my Indian students, they don't need the fancy scientific calculator because they can find the standard deviation with a dollar store calculator because they know all the steps.
Because they know the steps and they know
Exactly.
That's what I'm trying to say. It's not about memorization, but the logic system
That's
is
it.
simply excellent. I love. I'm from India. I've done my basic education here. I've got a lot of Canadian degrees too. I just wanted to share what my children studying here. I told them, take out your calculators, use your brains, come up with that. Then you take your calculator and make sure that they got it. My son is a mechanical engineer now, and he's topping at UST. He does things without his calculator like that. Why? Because of my training, and that is coming from my Indian system. So I love the logic that is built in. Okay, I understand about the memorization, but the logic is fantastic.
Thanks. Sure.
Just a few little things. In the IB program, they give all the formulas for the entire program as a booklet
Right.
before you write your exam. So there's not an issue. I mean, I don't teach currently in the IB program. It's just a footnote. I'm sure you knew that.
International Baccalaureate.
Yes.
Yeah.
You said change your marking system. Well, we've adopted this year the levels marking. So everyone's on a scale of 1 to 5. I myself don't like it. That's a different conversation. But the spirit of it is very good. because it rewards effort from the kids and
Right.
ideas, and
Right.
you're not penalizing them for, look, this question's out of 5, but you made a negative mistake, and that costs you 1 mark. Well, then you lose 20% of the worth of the question in that one
Right.
miscalculation, but there are actually 50 calculations in that.
Right.
Right, so you have the freedom to use your professional judgment
Yeah.
to look at the spirit of the work, to say this is excellent quality work. Okay, fine, you did make a calculation mistake, but you can reward students in that
Yeah.
system for the quality of their thinking. Okay, which is really great.
Yeah.
But I think problem solving is becoming a large focus.
Yeah.
And I do think we're looking for ways to stimulate their imagination.
Yeah.
So
So I think I'm glad you made those points. I think my point is we have many different learners and many different ways to learn in today's world. So I'm maybe advocating a little bit for those that are not that strong, to find in creative ways to make them stronger. For some, the things you described will be good, but also they don't all have to be brilliant in it. They have to appreciate it, so they have to put the effort and be frustrated, but then they might have other skills, right? None of us are perfect because we're all born with some sort of deficits, right? There is no such thing as a perfect person, perfect human being. My eyesight is bad on one eye. It basically doesn't work. I played tennis and I was aspiring to be the next Bjorn Borg, and that was the guy when I was young, right? And but you know, I ran into a certain limit quick because my eyesight. But I was on the net faster than anybody else. Why? Because I had developed this incredible last reaction, right? So my point is on the learning. I think there are many different learners, and not one fits all, whether it's in math or English or whatever, right? And I would advocate that we become as creative as possible about servicing different learners. And I think the marking has a lot to do with it, because if you use one form of marking for all those different learners, and an IB program are quite high-end, right? We get at the college not necessarily always the strongest learners, right? That's why they go in a one-year certificate. Right, and that's my phone, just ignore it. So they go in that program for a reason, right? I have met a lot of kids that go in one-year certificates of techniques, right? Does any of you guys teach in students that are in techniques programs?
Yep.
So a lot of them were the kids that you would all see in the principal office, and they were, right?
Absolutely.
Okay, so non-traditional learners, whatever the terms
Yep.
we use.
They are not book people.
And I'm sure that's why you get called in sometimes to get them back on the rails. Sophisticated ways might not work. We also need to work on the excelling and the great, right? So totally with you there. But also we need to get those kids in techniques enough confidence that they can do the math,
Yeah.
right? And that they can...
That's key, really,
Right.
the confidence.
Yeah, and there are different ways nowadays, different tools, and I think also different didactic findings and research in different ways of learning, even if you have them all in one classroom. I'm not saying your job is easy, right? I think it's difficult, and it gets more and more difficult. But more and more rewarding too in many ways, if you can get these different learners, because they all need to learn to work with artificial intelligence, right? It's a scary scenario if we have people working in a world that don't understand artificial intelligence and say, okay, the machine just told me to do this, so I'm going to do this. Right? So they have to have some capacity as controllers of machines. And that comes with some basic understanding of how this artificial intelligence at the end of the day is all zeros and ones or whatever the description for it is. So I'm advocating for thinking about that more than ever before. And at our kind of institutions as colleges, we work with a lot of different learners, more so than in some of the high schools where you get streamed, or at the universities, or in our degree programs. Because you don't get in our degree programs if you don't have a certain level. But the majority of our students are in 2-year diplomas. And we're not so much at Seneca anymore, but you go to Durham College. Anybody from Durham? They have the campus on around along the 401 in Oshawa, where they built this neat great culinary school. But the other building has, I think, 700, 800 students, and none of their programs are longer than 8 months. And they get math, and they get language, because the employers ask it, but a lot more challenging than elsewhere. That's what I'm advocating for. And I think in the past, we didn't have all those tools. We didn't have the IT and the extra tools. So we did rely on memorization. And I'm not saying memorization is a bad thing, right? I'm just saying that it doesn't always work for everybody. That's why we still exclude a hell of a lot of people around the world on higher education. We are 7 or 8 billion people, whatever the count is. And I think that I read in the UN report that only about not even close to 2 billion are higher education. And we exclude all the others. And part of the reason is that they can't cope in secondary or primary. So there's also a lot of work to be done in that field, of course. But they all going to work with that artificial intelligence. Right? So that exclusion that we accepted is just, I think it's going to be a time bomb if we don't do something about it. And so and I'm a development worker, right? My passion is, I shared with you my years in Mozambique, and we're doing a project with Seneca in Mozambique, and wow, these schools are far behind. 2 of Maria's people just went there, and right, and they need to get up to there. And it's probably a mix of things. And I'm glad you corrected me, because I didn't want to put India as a place that is only doing one or other. It's an incredible diverse place with some of the best brains, but also parts of the country that are really, really, really far behind, right? So, so there are many world, really. And so I think that's, for me, internationalization is trying to, as much as we can, level the playing field, because Europe is going through this influx of refugees, immigrants, whatever you want to call them, migrants, and it's a serious problem, and there shouldn't be so many people that have to leave. And they don't all leave because there's violence. They leave because there's lack of economic opportunities, lack of good schooling, and many other reasons. And the Europeans pillaged the continent for a long time, and they get payback now. But I think through education and projects where we find good ways to educate them on those principles, we can make that over time better. That's my passion. My passion is about not building walls like Trump and that kind of idiocy, because it's going backwards. The Chinese built walls, didn't work. The Russian built walls, and we took it down in Berlin. And here's a guy getting voted in who says, I'm going to build a wall. Right? That's in Europe. In Holland, a guy who is a straight fascist who says, kick out all the Moroccans, I don't care whether they're 5th generation or not. He got 20% of the votes. Right? So there's a stuff happening, and I think it is people feel disengaged because they can't keep up with that education, because it has had a lot of focus on excellence. And I'm not saying we shouldn't do excellence, right? Don't get me wrong. I think excellence is there and needs to happen, but we also need to work on those lot of thousands and millions of people that are disenfranchised because they were not helped. I'll stop. Enough of my soapbox.
So, on behalf of the OCMA, all of our colleagues here, thank you so much. This is a little thank you from us, so thank you so much.